Diarmuid, welcome to Tales from the Land, a living community research project where we at the Green Step are inquiring into the 21st century realities of food production, farming and living well with the land here in Ireland.
I'm Mel.
And I'm John.
And we're your hosts.
In these podcasts and online events, we will use the arts of conversation and storytelling to listen, learn and create new understandings of one another and the multitude of approaches being used to engage with the complexities of the climate and biodiversity crisis. As we go, we'd love to hear from you about your experiences, struggles, ideas and visions for a sustainable, prosperous and just future for all. Please send your ideas to thegreenstep3@gmail.com and we'll include what emerges as we engage with the policy consultations of land use in Ireland. Our ancestral practices of tending to the land are rooted in our Irish culture, heritage and language. How can we weave these ancient wisdoms together with modern solutions for sustainability? We'll meet with you and a variety of folk to explore this question and more. Together we intend to listen and learn from the tales of the land and see where the journey takes us. Diarmuid and welcome to episode 7 of the Tales from the Land podcast. This week we're speaking about AgriTech, the role of AgriTech in modern agriculture and how AgriTech can be used to make the needed changes that we need to happen in modern agriculture going forward. We speak to Diarmuid and we actually recorded the podcast on Diarmuid's farm, which is absolutely beautiful. Diarmuid has a type of cow called a Guernsey cow. It is a heritage breed. It also creates a type of milk called A2 milk that is no longer produced by the majority of dairy cows, and it has quite a lot of health benefits. So Diarmuid speaks to us about this. We speak to Caroline. Caroline, she works on an intensive dairy farm and she also helps Diarmuid run his farm. And finally, we speak to Mark. And Mark works for the Irish Cattle Breeders Federation, and he speaks to us about the role of cattle breeding and how cattle breeding can be used to create cows and to change cow genetics so that they actually become more environmentally friendly. This was an absolutely fascinating conversation, and we spoke close to 2 hours straight, kind of in and out, as we sat in the back of Diarmuid's campervan with the windows open on his farm as the rain was lashing around us. It was a fantastic evening, and one I would like to repeat very soon. So sit down, grab yourself a cup of tea, and please enjoy the podcast. Thank you for listening.
Diarmuid, and welcome to episode 7 of Tales from the Land. We are sitting here today in North Cork in a pretty awesome campervan with a cloud wallpaper above us and looking out at a pretty rainy May evening.
It's more like December than May.
Yeah. With some gorse, lots of mud, 2 lovely cows that have just been milked in like a homemade stall, and we're sitting here with Mark and Diarmuid and John. So welcome, and yeah, it'd be really nice to introduce yourselves. So let us know who you are and what you do.
Cool. Thanks for having me on. My name is Diarmuid McSweeney. I'm most importantly from Cork. Before we go any further,
from my own heart.
Yeah. So about me, I grew up just outside Macroom, in a place called Lasarda, like a highly intensive dairy area of the country. I went to UCC and I actually studied the same course as you guys, in environmental and earth system sciences, and ended up in ecology. After that, I went straight into a PhD with Moorpark, so with Tagus, and had a great time there. I was in my PhD a year when I became a research technician for Tagus, and then a year later I got offered an opportunity to go work for a Swiss AgTech company. They were developing 3D sensors in motion, so what we're calling at the time is 4D, and they had the ability to read a cow in motion as she left the parlour, say, and it would evaluate her live weight gain, her linear scores, body condition score, and locomotion all in the one time. It was very cool stuff, though. Very cool stuff. Concurrent to all this, I, as part of my PhD work, we were developing sensors and technologies for implementation onto pasture-based production systems for dairy, entirely for dairy, to be honest. And one of those tools was called Grasshopper, and that's been commercialized since. And 2018, I left that job in Switzerland and came back to work full-time on Grasshopper. And we're here today. My the latest project. We purchased this place last year. It's only 12 acres, and wanted to what can you do with 12 acres? So we were over in Italy with a friend of mine, Lorenzo Lezzo. I worked with him in Moorpark. He brought us to a herd of Guernsey cows over there, and they're producing A2 milk and selling it at a really high premium to specialty shops. And if you ever work with Guernseys, you're like, these are class. They're horizontal. That you cannot bother these cows. But they produce a thing called A2 milk, and just in case you're not familiar, at some point in the last couple of hundred years, there was a genetic mutation in the European dairy herd where the protein in milk changed from what's known now as A1 to A2. All the way around, from A2 to A1. So the original milk was A2 milk, and our digestive system copes a lot better with A2 milk. So a lot of people who think that they might have issues with lactose intolerance or dairy intolerances are actually quite capable of drinking our milk, no issue. And we have clients at the moment who are drinking our milk, and they used to break out in rashes and eczema and have, for the want of a better word, cobwebs in their mouth, mucus, and none of those issues when they drink the A2 milk. So that's proof in the pudding.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so that's it's. I think this would be classified as a micro dairy, but it's getting going. We're actually doing a farmers market tomorrow in Fermoy. We're doing it. Yeah, it's going. It's starting to actually get going. We only had about 2 months, so it's very early days, but slowly getting there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
No bother.
Hi, Mark is my name, Mark Waters. I'm actually from Wexford originally, but I've been living in Cork for 6 years now. So I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means, but anyway. So I'm kind of a little bit odd in that regard. My parents are not farmers, but I was one of these kids who always loved farming, and then I never grew out with it. Like most sensible human beings, I didn't grow out with the love of farming. My aunt and uncle have a mixed dairy and suckler beef enterprise with pedigree Charolais, and basically that was a second home for me growing up, and I spent a lot of time working there on holidays and in between jobs at different parts of my life. I went on to study agricultural science, animal and crop production in UCD for 4 years. Graduated in 2013. That was my route into farming, as I could see it, because I had no wealthy aunts or uncles or nobody to inherit any land from, unfortunately. So I said I'd get into it that way. I did about 6 months of postgraduate research work on some animal nutrition in Lyons Estate in UCD. I spent a year then at home on the aunt and uncle's farm, just farming full time, and then I started a graduate program in March 2015 with the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation, and I've been with them ever since. So it started out as a year's graduate contract, and they obviously took to me and I took to them, and I'm still down there 6 years later. So so I work with the Herd Plus team in ICBF, so that's kind of the front end, the farmer facing. So even still to this day, I would have to do a certain amount of customer support in my role, answering farmer queries and queries from other people in the industry. But the main project that I personally have been working on for the last 4 years now has been a thing called DNA-based calf registration, and that's a system whereby we've been genotyping baby calves at birth and fixing parentage errors prior to them being fully registered in the National Cattle Database. So that's going from strength to strength. We started out with 18 herds, 1,500 calves in 2018, and this year we have just kind of finished the main bulk of 400 herds, 40,000 calves. So it's growing from strength to strength. So that takes up the vast majority of my time. So that's me up to about an hour before here, doing a bit of cramming on some facts and figures before it was So that's me to the present day.
That's so funny. I had a dream last night that the two of you had frantically scrambled to get loads of notes, and that you'd come with all this printed out information. I was like, no, there's no need for it.
It's in the car if you want it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm wondering. You know what, I think actually I'll start with a story to set the theme, right? Because we're looking at ag tech, and I'm definitely would describe myself as a wild woman. I try to kind of be, I'm not a tech person as much as I don't even try to be. I'm not at all. And I'm super open about that. But you're, tech men, and I'm really curious to learn from you today. And I suppose in the context of this, I'm thinking of like how during the revolution in India, Gandhi helped people fight for their freedom by getting them to begin spinning again and using the spinning wheel and going back to their old tools. And that is what was a really strong, a strength for them in revolting against this colonial system that had come in and wiped away this massive textile system. And now if anyone has better context for that, please come in, because I didn't do my research very well today.
No, it sounds pretty standard for colonialism.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, absolutely. That's it.
Just about. Yeah.
And we've identified a lot in this podcast that the roots of this system that we're working in and the way our policies come in, there are colonial roots, and we're looking at how can we kind of maybe heal some of that? How can we heal the violence in these systems? How can we heal the wounds that we hold in our land relating to the famine, and we have a lot of stuff to be healing, so that's part of this journey we're on. And then I'm also thinking about like how, say, tools like the plough really transformed agricultural systems. And I know now things are so mechanized, but there's still one farmer, I think Jim Cronin up in Mayo, who is still tilling his field with a horse, like going back to the old way. But then at the same time, the plough, while it has caused a massive revolution in agriculture, it's also degraded the soil. So now there's a lot of work needing to be done to enhance the soil. And then I'm thinking of things like Facebook as a technology, like the pros and cons of that. And so technology can clearly be a massive tool to accelerate societies and make massive revolutionary change. And it also has kind of sides we need to be mindful of. And I know some people listening to this might hear something like genetic testing and go, what's that about? So this is about demystifying that. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the Cattle Breeding Federation and like what you do, and help us demystify it. We'll gaze into the ball with you.
Sure. When you mentioned Facebook and technology and unpackaging that, I was starting to wonder how long we were going to be planning to be here. Maybe it was no coincidence we're in a camper van, but no. Basically, what the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation, people ask me, I suppose, what do you do for a job, or what do I do, and it can be difficult sometimes to explain what do you do. It's a bovine genetics company, I suppose, primarily, but it's quite unique worldwide insofar as we're set up in a not-for-profit. So our board is kind of, our stakeholders are farmers and farmer organisations, breed societies, milk recording, genetics companies. So different stakeholders in animal, in cattle breeding throughout the country, from different areas. So that it creates complexities because we have to toe quite a tight line kind of politically with all those different agendas and things, but also it keeps us quite independent because we have to toe that middle ground. We're not at any point favouring one side over another. If you
Yeah,
can.
and built on cooperation and actually listening to each other and having to find the middle ground as opposed to it being driven by profit and who's going to...
Exactly. So, our mission statement is about increasing sustainability and profitability for farmers through sustainable decisions and improved technology, basically. So how we do that fundamentally is we collect as much data as we can on all the cattle in the country and across a whole range of areas like production, meat yield and carcass weights and milk yields and fat and protein, all of those production type things, to health traits, to things like docility, anything basically that can be selected for genetically. So if it is heritable and we can actually select for it in the population, we'll have a look at it. And if it has an economic impact on the farmer, we'll have a look at it. So if you take extremes of that, like, coat colour, for example, is entirely genetic. If you feed your cow, it won't turn blue. It's entirely a genetic trait, but it doesn't actually have any impact.
So you're telling me cows aren't flamingos?
No. So exactly. So so we don't focus on those things, and likewise things that we can't really attribute to genetics, we won't pick for either, So we collect data and we collect them, and one of the things that makes us unique is how integrated our system is. So we collect data from farmers, but also from marts, abattoirs, creameries, milk recording, the Department of Agriculture, Animal Health Ireland, literally vets, AI technicians, literally every stakeholder in the industry feeds into our database, and that's quite unique. Most other countries, if private companies who do what we do, they generally focus on a particular breed. So the Guernsey Society might have their own, and they collect data just on pedigree Guernseys, and it's quite limited, and they don't talk to the the Jersey Society or the Frisian Society, and they don't talk to anybody who hasn't got purebred Guernseys because that gets tricky. Whereas because we're so integrated, we can do all the crossbred animals and all the different things. It's completely integrated, and it absolutely magnifies the power of what we can do.
Diarmuid sitting here with a very impressive look on his face.
I can't praise ICBF enough. I've travelled a bit, all for farming related stuff, and their ICBF is renowned around the world, and it's not just a feat of your technical expertise and the people you have, which are amazing. In fairness, you have some. Thank you. Up there, but
the other people,
absolutely, man. There's fantastic people there, but it's the political power and clout that ICBF have that you cannot gather in any other country. If you were to try and get ICBF set up in England or the equivalent, it would involve about 80 or 90 stakeholders who would be at each other's throats.
Yeah, I think there's an element. There's certainly a point to that. I think there's an element of timing. Our timing was favourable. We were 20 years in existence a couple of years ago, and at that time, I don't think people realised the economic value of data so much. It was harder to collect. We weren't as integrated with the Internet of Things and all that kind of stuff, and people hadn't really cottoned on to harvesting from an economic point of view the value of data. So the idea is fundamentally a great one, but we were lucky in the timing because we were able to sell the idea without people being too hung up on what they could make off it themselves in terms of money. Whereas if we were trying to do what we are doing even in Ireland today, everybody would have their own value on the data. So we can get data, we can transfer data now, and we have data agreements, and they're very farmer centric, and we tend not to charge money for our data, and likewise then we can get a lot of data, most of our data, for free as well. And that's because we have a legacy of doing that from the start, and people know what we're about, and we've reached a certain critical mass, and and people have seen the benefits of it, whereas unfortunately in other countries it didn't set up that way. And now that people know the economic value, it'd be very difficult for anybody to part with you know, they'd be basically asking them to part with their money, their earning potential to do that, you know. But how we do that, the primary thing we use for that is a thing called genetic indexing. So basically, if you take a dairy cow, there's a number of traits that are both genetic and economic, as I mentioned before. So if you take something like milk production, is the obvious one, you know, yield and fat and protein, but also things like fertility, you know, how quickly they go back in calf, because there's a cost of putting a cow back in calf, and also it affects their yield, their health. Obviously, healthier, happier cows produce more milk. All of that, all of those type of traits, and they have varying degrees of importance. And so basically, we based on the information we have about the animals, about their parents, and through all this data we're collecting, we rank all the animals in the country for those traits and give them a value. And the economic value is supposed to represent the additional profit the farmer would make if he bred from that, if he kept the offspring from that animal. And so it's used as a comparative tool. So really, it doesn't matter whether it's €100 or €1,000 or whatever the figure is. Basically, what it means is that if you've one cow at €100 genetic merit and another animal at 150, that the progeny of the second animal should leave you on average €50 more profit per lactation based on all the other traits.
Is there ethical concerns around that? Like, I'm thinking about interbreeding and things like that. Like, because again, if you find out that a bull will give daughters that have a huge amount of milk, you want to breed for that. But if you breed too much for that, you're just going to create genetic depression. You're going to have ICBF.
So again, that's part of that's the other part. The other part of what we have to do. So we generate the indexes, which are the primary tool to pick the animals. But then we have to decide what traits. So how to weight traits. So we'll weight traits based on their economic importance, but also based on the national population trends. So, for example, we had an index before ICBF really got going. The general index used here was called a relative breeding index, and it was entirely focused on production. And over that time, our national population for dairy cows trended towards kind of larger Holstein type cows, big frame, poor physical health in a lot of cases, very, very poor fertility, a lot of health issues. Basically, because we were focusing very, very narrowly on one trait, and biologically, if you select for extra milk, the energy partitioning in the animal, where it gets that extra milk from, is by denying other parts of its body, like its you know, fat cover and general health and fertility and that kind of stuff.
So kind of like breeding, say, Labradors or any other pedigree dogs, and breeding them so much that, you know, they have all of these typical health conditions.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're focusing on one trait so specifically that it actually becomes detrimental because
it's not holistic.
No, exactly. These things are never in isolation. You know, lots of traits are inversely connected biologically. So it is possible to improve on both traits, but you have to do it much more in a much more balanced fashion. So what we would have done is we would have included fertility as a trait, but also increased the weighting on the index for fertility to incentivize the farmers to pick the animals with the better fertility. So we can set the national, we help drive the national breeding program by organisations like Chagas, and based on research we can identify trends and problems and then adjust the weightings of the different traits, so that, and they will re-rank, and farmers then will go, I had the best herd of cows in the country yesterday, and now you've re-ranked. You've changed the goalposts and changed what we were looking for, and now my cows are only halfway down the league table, and it does, and you can understand why guys get frustrated.
So it comes back to like that balanced cow. If you have a balanced animal, you'll never get the re-ranking will never really.
No, this is the point.
Like if you're chasing that EBI number, which is
or milk production only, or fertility only, or whatever it is, you know,
whatever's the trend of the day.
Your long-haired golden retriever only, and forgetting about its, you know, the shorter nosed pug or whatever it is you're doing, you know. So this is so we help shape the national breeding program. And we do that then by providing information to the farmers and to AI companies, so that they pick bulls that also conform with the goals that we have set as an industry. And we help them select those bulls, and then we also help promote. And then we have tools then for the likes of your inbreeding and narrowing the gene pool. That's something we would monitor as part of that overall conversation. We have a tool called Sire Advice, for example. What that does is it's kind of an algorithm basically in the background. So it takes the herd's own cows, and they can enter in the identifiers for the bulls that they're planning to use. And the first thing it'll do is an inbreeding check. So it will avoid matches between bulls that are related to the cows that they're being matched to.
Yeah.
And then what it tries to do is maximise the balance. It'll try and maximise the genetic gain overall, but it'll try and do it in a balanced way so that you have animals that are gaining a little in all the different areas we're trying to, as opposed to just,
if you imagine like Tinder for cows.
Tinder for cows.
This is an algorithm that goes and finds the best bull.
Yeah. We had an update of the program last year, and we had a discussion internally about whether we should rename it or rebrand it, and modernise it. And I suggested the name Master Mater, but it didn't. Wasn't felt. Maybe it was.
That's not familiar.
Master Mater. Yeah, didn't really take off. I thought it might be catchy, but it didn't really take off.
I think it's catchy. I'll have to admit though, like some of what you've said there has kind of like gone over my head, and I can really see how it's so intricate and complex, and that Ireland are literally leading the way. And I think it's really interesting that Ireland are leading the way and it's being run by a co-op, like as opposed to a privatised company. Like that's already a really good thing when we're looking at a globalised market and all of these for-profit companies that are really dominating it. To have a leader in a national context that is a co-op is amazing. And then I'm also aware that like at the Eat Lancet report, they did a launch in Ireland maybe even 3 years ago now at this stage, and they were talking about like increasing the Irish herd size by 22%, because obviously with all of that specificity and with all of that science, like we can kind of, I suppose what I'm trying to lean towards is like that we can breed cows to be better for the environment. And be more productive.
Just generally better cows. Like so, that Lancet report was the number 22,000 or something.
22% they want to increase it by.
Yeah, like in reality, if the national herd today, the national herd 3 years ago when the report came out increased by 20%. Let's say there would probably be a 50% increase in milk production today, because the amount of genetic gain in the national herd, there's nowhere in the world, and I can honestly say this, that can produce milk at a lower environmental impact in Ireland.
But the numbers wise, so again, we soon if the herd size does increase by 22%, we then are limited by our land mass.
Well, and then
will we not lose more of our natural environment?
We don't need, like, there's a big trend in the media the last few weeks about Antashka versus Glanbia.
Kilkenny,
So like you can, and to be fair, the media coverage of it was quite biased towards the environmental side of it. And look, and that I just think it should have been probably a bit more balanced. And there were certain radio programs there that completely, went farmer bashing.
Yeah.
And there was no need for it. Like
that doesn't help.
I think that's one of the areas that we've been focusing on a lot, especially on the beef side, because there's a lot more schemes. The average beef income is an awful lot lower than the average dairy income. They're under a lot more pressure, so there's a lot more pressure politically to come up with schemes and things, to try subsidise the income. But one of the things, the whole the general direction of the CAP.
Caroline's coming in here. Welcome. Not at all. Good stuff.
The general direction of the CAP has been more towards environmentally, and that's not completely altruistic. Part of that's from like World Trade point of view, because it's easier for them to defend, protectionism of their farmers. I'm using inverted commas, but they would be accused by other industrial nations of, suppressing the international prices of things by protecting their own farmers. But they can justify that a lot more if the money that's being given to farmers is for an environmental good or a social good.
Yeah.
rather than just increase production and dumping the whole lot on the world market and suppressing the world price for stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I feel like there's a little bit of a balancing act though. If we're increasing our herd size by 22% and another country isn't reducing it by 22%, then it's this infinite growth, which we might come to in a minute. But Caroline, it'd be really nice if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Caroline.
Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? What's your interest?
I'm from West Cork. I grew up in a dairy and beef farm, so a small farm, just about 70 or 80 acres. So I grew up, I suppose, looking at the bigger picture rather than just dairy and so on. We saw we finished all our cattle. We had all the calves. So the bigger picture, as opposed to just one single item, like. Whereas here now you're on our farm. I'm not sure if you're talking about it already.
Small, not very little.
But we just have 2 cows here. We're looking at making a product that's more unique, I suppose, and more have a less impact on the environment and something that people want as opposed to they're being forced to take because we have so much of it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, there's kind of been this drive for numbers in the dairy herd. Look, it actually comes back to your question.
Yeah.
Like, if you can do something specialised and of high value and of good consumer use, you can make a living out of a much, much smaller enterprise.
Yeah.
Like, there's a push at the moment to get up to the hundreds of cows. Whereas if you did something niche, something specialised, you'd have far less necessity. Look, there's a double-edged sword. Like, the biggest indigenous employer in Ireland, hands down, is agriculture. Okay. Indigenous, okay? But as a result, there's a lot of people to be fed along the line.
Yeah.
So between the teat and the bottle of milk in the fridge, or the infant formula over in China, or whatever it is, there's a lot of people to be paid. And look, that's great, and it's supporting a lot of families. But as a result, the co-ops, and I know, like, big fan of co-ops, but there's a lot of bureaucracy and money that goes into these things that, is it actually necessary? It probably is for the whole, as the industry as a whole, or else the shape the industry's taken.
I think that's a big part of it. I think sometimes my perception is that people separate economics and environment, and it's one or the other. You can make money or you can be an environmentalist, but you can't do the 2 things, Whereas
that's a huge problem.
Yeah, going into college, like go to study zoology or ecology, you're going in going, never going to get a job out of this, but I want to do it anyway.
Like I came in with the idea of I'm never making money, but this is what I want to do. The wrong thought process.
Yeah, no, it is, and the other thing is, like, if you want to really affect change, I believe in how farmers produce and this drive for more output and increasing the national herd by 22% and all of these things. That's driven by the fact that if you look at it's a €10 billion industry to the national economy, but the farmers are on the thin edge of the that wedge, and you're basically asking farmers, you're asking them to make the economic sacrifice. So if you have a guy, this is really crude, but if you have a guy who's 12 suckler cows, and you're telling them, we need to, cut 2 of those cows because of the environment. It's effectively like asking him to give up 2 months' wages, and he's already on the average beef farmer income was, according to Teagasc, was, I don't know, €9,000 a year. What I mean? It's not, by any measure means, and even dairy farmers, according to that same Teagasc report, were, I think it was about 67,000. But again, I read an article somewhere lately, I think it was the Journal, and it was a pretty progressive dairy farmer, and he had taken the time and sat down and looked at his labour and his time against. So even if he was earning 60,000, his average hourly rate was €1.90 or something. He had worked out. It was ridiculous, So you're asking people who are at that end of the spectrum to then make all what they feel like is the entire economic sacrifice to if you go and culling cows, you're culling those people's ability to make money is what you're doing by that.
Can I ask your question then? Why is there a drive for numbers, quantity, not quality?
Yeah, and I might just add to that before you come in. Like you say, I know James O'Neill, he just has a hobby farm at home, but he has like heritage species of cattle, you know, with like more diversity. And even say with pastures, if you've got more different diversity of plants, you can reduce methane emissions because there's different species that they're eating. Like, you know, is there, like, I'm kind of wondering, you know, there's so much that can be done from a centralized point of saying, okay, the herd should go in this direction, but what about that sense of diversity to kind of be able to have cattle that are better suited to West Cork and some that are better suited to Donegal, you know?
Yeah, so again, that's what I'm saying. As long as the margins are so small and the setup is, you know, the economic setup is entirely linked to production, then you're never going to sell those type of solutions, because a perennial ryegrass, a monoculture perennial ryegrass sward will produce more kilos of milk for you to sell. More kilos of dry matter. I'm getting into Diarmuid's area now, but it'll produce more kilos of dry matter, more milk, which will be a bigger income for me. So what you actually have to do is economically incentivize the reduction of output. You know, you're never going to get guys to buy in, because like if you went to any sector in the country and said, will you take a cut to your wage for the environment?
No, and we don't want to be.
But
we've
that's
really seen in these talks like that demonisation of farmers, and like that's what we're trying to kind of push back against. And I know you're saying there with like the A2 milk, you're creating a niche product for a market. Like, do you think like that sense that there is more economic profitability in it? Like, is that the way it's going to go? Or
the system has been geared to production.
Yeah,
it's been geared completely production, and like you might have heard the abolition of milk quotas in 2015, which was a turning point for Irish agriculture. It essentially let the handbrake down. Like we could drive on, and well, up to a few weeks ago when we can't build any more stainless steel for production, as of that court ruling. And so that's the new quota at the moment.
So explain that. Some people may not know that.
So I'm not an expert in it at all, but like in broad terms, Antashka took Glanbia to the court system, and their argument was very smart. To be fair to Antashka, they didn't object to
the building itself.
The building of.
They objected to having more cows in the southeast of the country.
So they essentially didn't go after Glanbia, they went after the whole dairy industry effectively, and the way they worded the case, and they were successful. At the moment it'll be appealed, and to be honest, it'll slow things down, but it's not going to stop it. It's not going to stop it, and there's too much concrete, there's too much steel, there's too much loans, there's too much debt in the country for an organisation like Antashka. Look, as good meaning as they were, I think that there was very little what do you call it? You know, arbitration between the two. You know, there were very polar opposite views inside in that case. You know, there was farmers versus Antashka. So like, and no one wanted to find any middle ground.
And more of that narrative of environmentalists against farmers, as if they're totally separate, which is idiotic.
Because through all these talks, you've realised that generally environmentalists and farmers want the same thing.
Yeah.
No one wants the land rights. No one wants.
Yeah. And if you ask most of these guys, sorry to interrupt you, but if you ask most of these guys who are milking 200 and 300 cows, if you ask them if they could get the same profit at the end of the year, the same income, would they rather go back to 100 cows? They take your hand off, because from a their quality of living would be so much better. A lot of guys didn't really want to go from 50 cows to 100 cows or 100 cows, because they had enough work on their own, and they had, you know, they were used to that level, and the quality of life. They could have a life outside the farming and whatever.
The one person set up a bit of family support, during holidays and evenings, things like that,
and be able to actually send your kids to college and do whatever else.
What's the magic number? What's enough? I suppose, like, you know, getting away from
it. Before we keep going on this, right? What's if we went to the roots of that? Like, is it policy? Is it like, is that what needs to change? The cap coming up?
Honestly, I think I know the epicenter of all this stuff.
Go on.
Honestly, like, I don't want to name names, right? But look at we'll call them German multiple retailers, right?
German multiple retailers. I like it.
Like, the price of food is phenomenally low. It's phenomenally low. Like, you can go into a certain supermarket and buy a basket full of food. I think like a trolley full of food for €50. I mean, like, you could brim the thing.
And most people won't even think about where it comes from. That came up a couple of weeks ago. Turlock is a market gardener, and he was saying, before he used to go in, buy a bag of carrots for 70 cents and had no idea where they came from and didn't care. And that people have forgotten that, and that's a big thing coming up out of this as well, is like food sovereignty and also the sacredness of food, like, you know, knowing where it comes from and who grows it, and actually saying thank you to that person.
I find that, you know, and it's opened my eyes, because with the cows, you have to educate people. They've forgotten, like you said, where food comes from. And as long as, you know, you'd be complaining about, you know, like, not complaining, but farmers are going to keep producing this food as long as there's going to be a market there for it. So if people want cheap food, it's going to be supplied, you know, and cheap food, you produce food cheaply, you know.
You need quantity to balance it out,
Yeah, that's
like,
it.
Look at it. Look at America as an example. They've gone so far down that line, where the quality of food is ridiculously low, but it is phenomenally cheap.
But it's like, if I can just say to the quality of food, I remember I lived in America for a short time, and one of my friends brought... that was a little dog just jumped up on the table there.
Welcome, Shadow. She wants in on this conversation.
So when I was in America, one of my friends bought first week bought a bag of celery and forgot about it and put it in the back of the fridge. A month later came back to it and hadn't even wilted.
Perfect.
And she was like, there's something very wrong, and threw it straight in the bin.
Yeah.
Like, food doesn't go off, nor does it taste right. There's something very odd. It's also the only place I've ever been where you realised that the price of food was connected to the harvest, basically. So in Ireland, we never see that. All our food is basically subsidised. Milk will always be the same price. You know, bread is always the same price. When I started in the US, the red peppers were like 20 cents. By the time I left, they were $2.30, because there was a bad harvest in California at the time. So that was the only time I'd ever seen the actual link. And most people didn't even notice.
But food security is so important, and like that is the opposite of food security.
Yeah.
You know, like if for what I kind of have an issue in America or something, that they're kind of put on a pedestal, but they don't. There's many things they don't do right. But I think the main crux of the whole thing is the price of food. People, and it's an amazing, as COVID might have been the trickle that might change that.
Yeah.
In 2019, there was something like 200 craft butchers closed. 200 independent craft butchers. You know, people who spent all their life producing a high quality product and selling it to the public. In 2020, about 4 or 5 opened. You know, so there's a very slow turn back to better quality food. People maybe people taking a breath.
We have to be careful on that front too, because it's a wider thing. Like, it's very easy for somebody like, you know, we again to mention, like we spoke about privilege earlier, but not everybody is in the same in the same position. So again, if you universally increase you could. I was making the point that I think that if you want these other goods to come from food production, like, you know, maintaining the land in a certain level of biodiversity and cultural and historical heritage and all these other things that we all want, you have to reward the farmers for doing that instead of production, because, you know, the only way they have of making an income at the moment is through extra output. So where does the cost of that come from? And if you lob that entirely onto the other end, you know, there is, even in, you know, 21st century Ireland, there's still like a lot of food poverty out there, and there's a lot of people who would be literally in dire straits if it wasn't for, you know, German multiple retailers or whatever you call them. Do you know? You know, they really would, and it's and that those type of prices have allowed certain people to eat healthier. Do you know what I mean? So it's not as simple. I'm not saying food should be cheap. I do agree with you that if you want the quality of product, but I'm just saying, you know, it's a very difficult thing politically, and you know, it's about, okay, there's no getting away from the fact that if you want this higher standard, if you want to take the focus away from production and output, which are generally what are the drivers of environmental detriment once you go past a certain threshold, then you have to have some other goal and a reward for that.
Change the goalposts, essentially. Like but
who pays the cost then is where it becomes difficult. And at the minute, the discussion, the reason farmers get up in arms is because they are being expected to take a disproportionate portion of that cost, and politically it's like a no-go in terms of food poverty to go near the price of food.
Yeah.
And then there's somebody in the there's a whole section in the middle, like you said. There's an entire billions of euros of industry in the middle as well, and they're supporting families, and maybe they should be paying a bigger share. I'm not going to say that one way or the other, but you just I think if you can get I personally believe, and it's not born out of I'm not some sort of Scrooge McDuck capitalist here or anything like that, but if you can get the economic equation right for rewarding and incentivizing the right thing and spread the cost of paying that reward the right way, the rest of the stuff will follow. Because I think if farm, at the minute, the farmers' choices between going out of business, increasing what they're doing, or going out of business, and they have no time to be thinking about, I'm not going to, you're running 20 grand a year, you're not going to be, out of the greater good putting, Timothy or Hen Coxfoot or something into your grass sward just because, you know what I mean?
At the start of this, we started off looking at donor economics as a different economic system, because time and time again, the conversation is coming back to this, the fundamentals of infinite growth, where some people are taking a hit, just isn't working. And apparently in the 50s, average household spend on food was something like 50%, and now it's 10%. And rent comes first. If you're going to do anything, you're going to pay for your rent before you pay for your food.
Maslow's hierarchy needs food, shelter. And that's, people spend an awful lot more on their car or their holidays than they do on food.
So what do we think is a solution? If we might tilt the conversation a bit to what, whether it's policy, or is it getting more people onto farms to have more kids rubbing cows, or what do you think are some of the solutions that
it's very important to provide
needed?
Very important to provide food for everybody.
Yeah,
that's a given. No one's going to take from that. But do
you think we need more people producing the food? I think
there are too many, or there are not enough people producing the food that we need. So
the premium food.
No, what I mean is that all those small farms that were there, maybe in the 80s and 90s, they were supporting an awful lot of people as well.
Yeah.
But those people, they've all gone into one farm, and there's one family was there, one partnership taking all this money. Yeah. There are some farms that are making an awful lot of money.
Yeah.
Far more than what they need.
Yeah.
There are. And I think that's the problem. The amount of dairy farmers or beef farmers, it's gone way down, but the amount of production has increased. So it's just kind of funneled down to a few people that are getting a lot of it. I think, and look, it's not going to go back either the way it was. It's not. But look, that's kind of my...
because of the scale. They need the scale. If you increase the margin...
Is that only in a context of a globalised market, though? What if we bring it back and it's coming up again? Localisation, food sovereignty.
We have to be global. We produce way too much food.
But can we not, is it not maybe even about looking at the fundamentals of that and actually trying to reorient it?
Whichever way you do it, so it's grand if you say, right, if you had a current system and you said, okay, we're only going to produce what's needed in Ireland and sell it to people in Ireland, and people in Ireland are only going to buy food from produced in Ireland, right? Just say you could do a flick a switch. I know that's a massive assumption, right? But if you flick that switch overnight, but even in the current system, everybody would expect food at the same price as they have now. Do you know what I mean? So because there'd be less demand, guys would actually push the average size and the intensification of the farms, because if people are going to spend, if there's less people buying it and there's no increase in price, then there's the margin is going to be even smaller. Well, just keeping the food within Ireland in and of itself just to to break it into its segments.
Well, and not to just keep in Ireland, because that's unrealistic, especially if we're looking at the trajectory of global weather patterns changing, climate migration. We're going to have more people migrating to Ireland because we're in one of those kind of zones that are going to stay relatively
super unpopulated.
Green. We're going to have more people. And I think
there's something like if the famine never happened in Ireland, we'd have about 30 million of a population.
Yeah, Ireland's the only country in Europe that has a population that is lower now than it was in the 1840s.
Mm-hmm.
Only country in Europe. That shows you again how devastating that was.
Yeah.
And were you going to say something on climate migration there?
Yeah, climate migration is a huge issue. Ireland, although we will be alright-ish, we are still going to have some terrifying problems. Like when you think about it, rain is increasing during the winters. We're going to dry up during our summers. We will have water insecurity for the first time that we've never had before. That worries me because at the moment our water infrastructure cannot keep up. At the moment, when we are one of the rainiest countries on earth, makes very little sense to me.
I suppose that with what was that? What was the famous Irish Water? You know, like when they were founded, I suppose their mandate was to try and fix that infrastructure.
What annoys me at Irish Water, and it does, and I could go on and on and on, was that it was a good idea.
Yep.
Ireland needed to. We're the only country in Europe that doesn't pay for our water. One of the only countries in the world, really, that doesn't pay for our water. Water is a resource. We have there's 98% of the water on Earth is salt water, so we can use 2% of the water on Earth. Of that 2%, about 98% of that is kept up in glaciers and in the ice caps and all that. So that means we've got about 0.2% of the water on Earth,
which we don't want to change either.
We don't want. Is drinkable?
Because if that becomes available, we're actually in big trouble.
Exactly, you're right. So 0.2% of the water is what is available and what is capable for us to use. So it's an incredibly precious resource. When Irish Water was set up, instead of looking at all of the other water systems in Europe and pick one of them and bring it over and be like, yep, that's what we're doing. One fascinating one I know of is Hungary. Hungary is really weird and odd because water is very expensive. But if anything happens to the water system, I mean anything, like if a pipe breaks, if the cryptosporidium gets into anything, the government pays for bottled water for you. So you get that bottled water, that's what you're paying for in your premium. If you can't actually pay for water, they have water pumps on the end of every street. So there's still water there, it's just you have to go out and get water at the edge of the street. Yeah. It's awkward.
And you value it more because you're paying for it.
Yeah. Completely.
That's the rule of everything.
It is. When it was brought into Ireland, the first time they brought it in, it would have actually meant that people in the lower brackets of society would have been paying twice what people in the upper brackets of society were. There was a huge outcry, as there should have been. Yeah. It was changed instantly, but they put out the first one first.
The narrative never changed.
Yeah. No one cared. And it really pissed me off because the first time I saw true civil disobedience in Ireland for the wrong reason.
Absolutely. People lost complete sight of what the protesting was about.
Completely.
And it's a shame because
it is.
We just, as a nation, we deserve basic infrastructure, and water is the primary one.
And we lose about 60% of our water. Treated water supply, 60% goes into the ground.
I feel like as we're talking about water, when I started Green Step, and I think you met actually Sarah and Michelle that I used to do the radio show with, and they were both doing Ag Science Masters, and they were basically wading through fields to go and wade in streams of shit. Well, water, but it was shit. Yeah. And we're sampling it. And basically, there's so much fecal matter in all of these streams contaminated. And that's a serious threat if we're looking at raising our herd size, if we're looking at going to a globalised market. We're degrading the health of our land here. So how does that fit in? What do you think there on that?
Policy's already there, to be honest with you. If you're in...
Well, why is it not being implemented then? What's the...
It is, to be fair, but I suppose, look, it is kind of a softy approach. Normally, how something is done in agriculture is it's brought in through a scheme, like reps, like GLAS.
Mm-hmm. So financially reward them to change their behaviour, and then but then unfortunately that financial incentive is often removed. So they have all the extra hoops to jump through, but often they don't any longer have any extra money for doing.
Okay, so
that.
There needs to be a consistency.
Yeah, and that's maybe always, but that's certainly the perception among farmers.
Say drinking oil streams, cattle drinking oil streams was first disallowed under GLAS, now under derogation, which is a category for high producing farms, so they can. If you meet certain environmental measures, you can spread more chemical fertilizer. They're forbidden from doing it now, and it's
only a matter of time before everybody is
Yeah.
doing it, you know.
and you will be severely fined for doing it. Like so, the progression is there.
You start with the early adopters and the progressive guys, and then you've streamlined the problems of it, and then eventually it becomes the standard through the industry.
Which is happening. Like there's the Bride projects, there's results-based agriculture
just over
systems.
the hill here.
Yeah.
Fantastic initiative. That's honestly.
Something that's come up that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. Did you want to add something there?
No, you're right.
No? Is it's come up now a few times, is like the role of soil health in all of this going forward, like, and maybe especially in relating to pastures, and how it's something that's kind of been overlooked a lot, like having healthy soil to have to reduce what you spray on the soil, and you know, better composting and using like silage as a better resource in that. Like, do you have any kind of soil nerdy stuff?
Again, I think it comes down to a lot of it comes down to economics. Not to be banging a drum, but if you look at like even like this 80s or early 90s, fertilizer was so cheap.
Yeah.
That you didn't have to. Why bother trying to take soil tests and stuff?
And no rules.
And no rules either.
Spread it as fast as you can.
You know what I mean? Whereas
grow more grass.
There's both extra regulation now, and rightly so, to prevent of leaching and you know, polluting water courses and that. But also because it's linked. You know, it comes from the Haber-Bosch process, which is an oil-based process, you know, so it's linked to the price of oil, so it's gone up massively, the price of fertiliser. So, I mean, you know, I think most farmers now, if you were to give them an alternative, that means they could produce the same for cheaper, but that was also, like, you know, environmentally better. Most guys would jump at it, like, you know.
But there is that option, clover. And farmers won't put it in.
Won't adopt
they
it.
are not putting it in.
Why do you think they won't?
There's more work. There's more management
in it. But you get the return if you actually manage it properly.
But you worked with it. It does work.
It does work.
So will you explain more about clover then? So how does that work as opposed to spraying fertiliser on the land?
Clover, in the later half of the year, you know, from now on, fixes nitrogen out of the atmosphere. And
what does that mean for someone who's never heard that term before?
So there's nitrogen in the air. Loads of nitrogen in our air that we breathe all the time. There's certain plants. Clover is probably the most like well-known one, but there's loads of nitrogen-fixing plants. So essentially, they suck in nitrogen from the atmosphere using, is it rhizotonic or something?
Rhizobium. It's a type of microorganism, a bacteria.
Lives on the root of the plant.
A symbiotic kind of.
Yeah.
So it sucks it out of the environment. Those little bugs, we'll call them, they convert it into nitrogen. That nitrogen becomes available then to the grass all around it and drives on growth in a lovely, symbiotic, natural way.
And what's your experience been of working with it?
Clover it's harder to manage it, alright. When you're reseeding it, it can come or it mightn't come. You know, you have to take the leap of faith and not spread the extra chemical in, because if you do spread it, it kills the clover. It doesn't give the clover a chance to grow.
Yeah.
So you have to, like, at this time of the year, cut back, reduce the amount of chemical in, which probably farmers are afraid to do because they mightn't get the, you know, there's kind of a...
You're kind of betting the future.
You're trusting into nature and letting go.
Yeah. But look, there are issues with it. In terms of grazing cattle on it can cause bloat, and bloat.
If you overgraze, then you can lose it out of the sward, and then you have to go spend money to reseed it back in and stuff as well. So.
Yeah.
Hello beloveds, this is Mel here, just popping in to let you know that it's not too late to participate in this joint research inquiry. The Common Agri-Food Policy consultation is closing on the 15th of June, so we're still putting ours together from this joint inquiry with this whole community of beautifully minded people. So if you want to add your thoughts to be included in our policy submission, you can send an email to thegreenstep3@gmail.com. You can also find out more at our website at thegreenstep.org. And We will be also engaging with the Common Agricultural Policy, which is going to be at the end of this year. So there's still quite a lot of time for that. But for the Agri-Food Policy, our deadline is the 15th of June. So by the time the next episode comes out, that episode will have just been included, but we won't be able to take any more. So this is your last chance if you want to get your word in for the Agri-Food Policy, and we would really love to hear from you. This week, before we get back to our episode, we are being treated to a beautiful poem written and spoken by Emmett Griffin, who is our beautiful community weaver in the Green Step Facebook community. He's always there with lots of inspiration and encouragement and thought-provoking words and beautiful poetry. And so this one is called The Green Man, and I have to say it did make me think of those little clover seeds that Caroline has been planting, and what it might be like for them to be rooted and emerging from the darkness and growing into strength. So I hope you enjoy it, and we'll dive back into the episode right after this.
With roots so deep, I start to creep through depths of fear, pain so clear. I steadily climb. I allow the rhyme to guide my process into the sublime. I enter new heights. I embrace delights. I surrender to madness. I live in the light. Pushing up, burning through, remembering my nature. How I grew from humble beginnings, from darkness and loneliness. I expand my perceptions. I radiate my greatness. I am king of myself. I fight for love. I sing my song, no matter how long it takes. I let go of the brakes. Spirit takes hold. The shit turns to gold. We rise through the chaos, we lift the despair. We create our word, one of goodness and care. Without oppression or crippling depression, we release our strength, allowing, trusting, giving away, dissolving in intimacy, ready to play.
So, what is the monetary value of clover? Is there is it more?
It grows more grass. Essentially, it grows more grass with less
Cheaply.
with minimal fertilizer application.
Look, for example, right, on a normal grass sward, if you're in irrigation, you're spreading 250 kgs of chemical in per hectare. Right, with a grass clover sward, you can look at reducing that to 150 or 100 and still get a similar output of grass.
That's more than halving your fertilizer bill.
And is it regular to practice saving seeds, or do people normally just buy seeds every year? Or would you normally save some seeds from that?
For grass varieties?
Yeah.
Yeah. So grass seed is like all seeds a business, but there's amazing genetic gain too in grass in the last 20 years, where there wasn't before. No one cared about grass. Whatever grew, it was green, it was growing in the field, it was considered grass.
There's the exact same principle as what we do with cattle.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's a great institute over in England called Aberystwyth. Maybe I'm pronouncing that completely wrong. It's Welsh, but look, it's a stat. It's a stat. But they produce varieties called Abers. So their prefix and all their varieties called Abers. You've Aberclyde, Abergain, Abermagic, Aberclyde.
Aberrace, Aberasting clovers.
Yeah. But they are absolutely leading the way in genetics. Easily, grass seed from 10 years ago versus grass seed today, the genetic gain could be anything up to 30, 40, 50% extra growth from these varieties. Look, they are monocultures, and there's feelings about that.
Yeah.
But generally, grass swards that people sow and are in mixes, though, too, aren't they? Really.
Generally, in production, high production systems, there are only 3-way mixes.
Okay.
So and the 3-way mixes would probably be 2 diploids, which are shorter growing varieties, and you do tetraploids, which are higher kind
would they have anything for pollinators in them?
No.
Oh, no.
No, not really.
Because again, clover is fantastic for pollinators.
But it's never there long enough
It's not growing a seed head.
Within a
Like,
21-day rotation, it never gets a chance to put out a flower for the pollinators.
yeah.
Fair. Okay, good point.
So like there is an issue. There's a company not too far from us down here, Sunnyside Seeds or something. They do wild bird cover mixes, high value ecology mixes. Did you plant them?
It depends on last year, yeah.
Yeah, and like they're lovely to look at. They're lovely. Like it would be super if farmers could be incentivized to plant a small piece of their farm. And it only takes a small piece. Like they're alive with nature.
And the Bride Project and the All Ireland Pollinator Plan are doing that. But I'm wondering, just as you mentioned, like say the genetic diversity in the grasses, like some people might hear that straight away and think GMO seeds. Oh my god, that's really bad. Like, can you explain why it's different to the seeds that are produced to be resistant to Roundup? Like,
look, it's breeding, just like ICBF. There's no like I think Monsanto have really coloured this badly for the whole world. Like, and look, if there's no fans of Monsanto, you're going to go a long way before you find someone.
I actually did a work placement when I was in college in the National Crop Variety Testing Centre, which is a branch of the Department of Agriculture, and basically it's how seeds get certified for use in Ireland, and what they do is they grow trial crops all around the country and this works for both grass and cereal crops and maize and all the different things. And what they'll do is they'll grow over a variety of different sites in different parts of the country, because they'll have different disease pressure and different weather conditions and different ripening, depending on, like, you would be amazed even in a country as geographically small as Ireland, the difference in the ripening dates for crops from south to north and so on. And they have trial plots then, and they'll grow plots that are maybe a metre or a metre and a half wide by 10 metres long within a field that's maybe commercially grown the rest of. And they'll have all the different varieties, and they go through different stages. So the first stage, when a new variety is being tested, will just have a code. They won't even have a name. And different varieties, they'll test them for all sorts of things then, like yield and dry matter content and protein content,
palatability,
that's for grass. For cereals, they look at things like lodging and disease resistance, and then eventually, after they go through several years of trials, then eventually, like, the worst ones will fall away. The ones that don't meet minimum standards for the different things, and the best ones are kept and named and sold and marketed.
So it's basically the same as, like, if you have a small plot and you're growing broccoli, and your best plant, you save the seeds of that and you keep using it every year, and you're picking the best seeds every year, and over time
your
it gets
broccoli
better.
company is huge.
Loads of broccoli to pick from.
Best way for people to describe it is, imagine if a seed was a Labrador and you were breeding Labradors, because people understand dog breeds. They understand that all dogs were once wolves about 30,000 years ago, and now they have an Alsatian and a pug. That you could think of that as a grass seed or as a barley seed. That's the difference.
Exactly. So again, the way plant breeding and quantitative genetics is done, even in cattle, is basically, if your ideal grass is a Labrador, you pick the dogs that look the most like Labradors. You have your set of traits or your set of goals that you're trying to achieve, and you pick those and you keep testing them.
And is there any sense of, like, patenting any of this? Like, I'm presuming not, because it's not made in a lab.
Well,
but
there's
the native varieties are patented.
They are owned by private companies.
All seed varieties are owned by private companies. Like, they do. Like, they
How
do
do you
sell
feel
them.
about that?
Someone has to be paid for the work that they do.
They pay paid for the work, but should they legally own something that is natural?
Like, they did develop it. Like, there's a lot of research, a lot of R&D goes into producing these products. Like, and to be fair, they need, for the advancement of the industry, perhaps in the wrong way if you listen to everything we've said so far, but like, they do need to be compensated for that.
But is there a point then where
why would anyone do work if you weren't going to get
it's a bit like cattle breeding. You breed the best stock, and obviously you own that animal.
But you don't own the breed, but you own the. You still own it. You still own that. Like, if I have managed, if the numbers are so much smaller, like with plants, you're dealing with like millions and millions of plants per hectare or whatever, and so you're not going to, you're not going to say, well, I have the best barley plant here now, come breed from it, like, because what are you going to do? Well, like, I mean, because of smaller numbers, it's down to the individual animals. But of course, private people own you know.
I like how you say, like, of course, right? And I just want to, I'm thinking of our friend Jimmy, and we had Jimmy on as well, talking about decoloniality. And in that place, we talked about this concept of ownership, right? And owning land. Like, how can anyone own something that can outlive them? You know, do you really own it? Hang on a sec, right? Do you really own it? And is it the same then with, say, something like a seed? Okay, you might have the patent for that seed, and then it reseeds itself. Do you then own that reseeded seed? Because that's what you're doing with Monsanto.
This is where it gets the intellectual property, and it's an area that we have had to be careful with as well. Like, our model in ICBF is to do with the farmers owning the data. Excuse me. But, you know, and at the moment, you know, in general, if a farmer uses an AI straw from a bull, so the AI company will own the bull, they'll own the semen, and they'll sell the semen, and that's how they make their money. But at the moment, in the typical thing...
Sorry, that just makes me laugh, like owning an animal's semen. Because it's not my realm to think about that. I go, wow,
and also,
that's so bizarre.
Yeah, it's so normal for me.
I was going to speak earlier when you were talking about artificial insemination. Again, in this realm, that's the most normal thing in the world. For anyone outside, it's like, what?
See,
terrible.
And that's the bridging, I think, that needs to be done.
What artificial insemination allows you to do is...
What is it, first off?
Again, assuming,
you've got like a big tube of sperm, and you...
it's actually tiny.
Like the inside of your boy.
It really varies depending on the animal, actually, because for pigs it's like, you know, a big sack of stuff, but honestly, but you know, like, it's like a quarter of a mil is all that's in a straw for cattle. Basically, what it allows you to do is harness the power of the best animals to increase your genetic gain. So you might, if you look at the entire population, there might be 10 bulls in the whole country that have the very best mix, that balance that you're looking for.
Yeah.
So you can make a gain quicker if you can use those bulls, but you can't physically use, like, you know,
drag them around.
They'll be worn out, exactly. So, like, a stock bull would have the ability to serve somewhere between 50 and 70 cows a week.
30. The rule's 30.
Well, I don't know. There could be more.
Yeah.
Every cow's not going to be pulling on them one day.
Yeah.
Okay, but
anyway, look, there's only so many, you know, under normal natural conditions.
Yeah.
There's only so far you can spread that, you know, and then if you're trying to get it's what's called genetic interval. So the more progeny you can get from that bull, the more records you can have, and then again, if you can pick the best of those again, you know, and so the more you can do that with. So what they do is they want to jump the bulls. Basically, they have an artificial vagina, and the bulls jump up and they collect the semen, and they're able to freeze it and spread it, kind of tin it out so that they can get more from it. And then basically what happens is then you have access to the very best. Instead of one guy having the best access to the best genetics in the country, all of the farmers, in theory, for a price, have access to the best. Yeah, and they use basically a little straw to put it into the...
No, what I'm saying is that there is an ethical concern around that.
I'm like, are you not playing God?
No.
Hang on, it is making me think of King Solomon, right, who apparently had 300 wives, and apparently all of us today are descended from him, right? So he went out and did it 300 times. So that's
but let's see God. So,
but can we?
He did. That was part of his plan.
But he probably did over years and years and years.
Yeah, but it's so.
I wouldn't see how. I think if you I don't
think
AI is no more
could be brought to any farm and do the same job.
But couldn't do it that many times.
No,
so that bit is artificial.
But even more than that, in conservation,
I don't think it's playing any more God than selecting which bull and which cow to go mate in the first instance. Do you know? I don't really. I think if you're going to have an ethical concern, really, to my mind, about, like, are we playing God by breeding stock? It's actually selecting which animals breed with each other at all. I think all you're really doing when you're using AI over natural thing is just getting the most out of the process you're doing. Do you know what I mean? I think
from a human point of view, this is what we want. So in that sense, it is this sense of humans choosing.
But to bring it back to, you know, I mean, I suppose that's what your motivation for breeding is. So again, we talked about output and the dangers of using output as a motivation for, or as a end goal from an environmentalist, as your sole metric. But again, we get back to like some of the work that we're doing in terms of schemes and stuff, as we're looking at the carbon footprint. We have 5 greenhouse gas detectors in methane hoods. We have a feed efficiency test centre in Tully in Kildare, and we take a certain proportion of progeny from AI bulls to collect more. It's more intensive data that we can't collect on farm. It's too expensive to collect on farm. And so we do it in a more research type setting, and we measure all the feed that goes into the animal and then measure the output, you know, in terms of carcass and that. But we've also added methane hoods so that we can actually quantify, aside from just making abstracting from efficiency, you can actually say these animals
produce less methane.
So you give them a little piece of meal. It's an incentive for them to come in like a treat. They stick their head into the hood, they eat it, and while they eat they breathe, and most of their methane's in their breath.
I'd like to hear your point on conservation.
Yeah, so in conservation there's a huge drive against artificial insemination. It doesn't happen very often because by the sheer act of copulation, the sheer act of together, there is actually different genetics can come through, because again when basically sperm is into is moving through the vagina in a more natural way, it tends to actually fight with each other, it tends to actually get kind of fought off in other ways, and you tend to get different sperm will actually be the ones to impregnate the egg as opposed to artificial insemination.
So then that's the God question a little bit, is that we're stopping the natural insemination, the natural coupling, and we as humans are saying no, well it should be this way and this is what we want, and so that's the kind of sense of playing God.
Again, like I would say, it's the whole idea of breeding animals is you're playing God really, more than the type of insemination, where you're going, you know, you're really splitting hairs when you get down to that level.
I might have the same, I think I'd probably say the same question to dog breeders and all the way we've bred dogs, and you know, that's just part of life. But
see, it depends on what you're trying to do. Like, I mean,
eat dogs, is it? I see your face.
No, it's more dog breeding in general. I dislike that. Like, I'll always get a mongrel. Like, give me a mongrel because he's going to live to 20.
But hybrid vigour. It's something you breed for in livestock as well.
I think it's not quite the same thing in terms of conservation when it comes to breeding, because, you know, conservation is looking at naturally occurring animals in their natural environment and trying to sustain that.
Fair. Where a cow now is not.
No, it's not. It's something that's been bred for a function, and it's not in danger of going extinct or anything either. It's been, whether you agree with the original decision to artificially deviate those animals from their wild ancestors or not, it's happened, and that's where we are. These animals are being kept for a function, do you know, and if you were to leave these cows go wild back into a wild scenario, they're not bred for that, and it would be cruel. So you either cull them, or, you know, you either make the decision we're going to have animal agriculture and it fits in whatever structure in its own sustainable proportion, or you have no animal agriculture. Do you know what I mean? So I don't think it's quite, you know, I don't think you can apply quite the same logic to it as conservation. Do you know? Yes. In that sense, they're deviated. Their paths are deviated now, and there's no putting that rabbit back in the hat, like, you know, whether you agree with it or not. Like, so there's, you know, you
but
just
then
have
I suppose there's a question of just what is our next step. Like, obviously the way we've been doing things is not working in many sectors, not just agriculture, just across the globe. We're at a crisis point and things need to shift, and I'm thinking now of Jimmy, right, and his totally
nobody who's listening to this maybe knows who Jimmy is, or maybe they all know. Oh, it was Jimmy on, he was he's on here, so Jimmy is a mutual friend, actually.
And Jimmy, that's how we got in touch, which is great. And Jimmy talks about decoloniality and looking at things from more of an indigenous perspective and not from our human-centric Western model. So if we're looking at just other ways of doing things going forward, as we're looking at the climate crisis, looking at those indigenous ways is one way of looking at it. And there is that sense then of, can you own a piece of land even though it'll outlive you? Can you own a seed? Should we decide what animal breeds with what? And obviously we're at a point where we have, and that's it. But it's kind of like, I feel like we we're asking the question. Is that how we still want to keep continuing?
Or it seemed as if really that question was never asked, it just happened.
Yeah, but
And
now
now it's
we
like-
have the chance to ask
Yes.
Going back to my point earlier, there's a lot of colonial influence in there too.
Yeah.
You know, like our land ownership system in this country is a carbon copy of the UK model. So we actually don't own any land. We own the right to use that land. The state own land. That's how compulsory purchase orders work. So if you want,
It also works with natural resources, because once you go below a certain number of feet in the ground, it's belonged to the state.
that's
as
right,
well.
yeah.
all you can do is sell the access to it.
So if I
So will
dug
you explain
for
that more about the fact that land, we own a right to land, we don't actually own the land
Yeah,
itself?
if you look at any deed, any folio in the country, it'll say it's a leasehold, a freehold or leasehold. They're the two things. Which essentially, a leasehold has a period, which is scandalously long. Usually, you're talking in millennia. But the freehold then is you have the state own the country, like the government own the country, and that's how compulsory purchase orders work. So if they want to build a road through your place, the state have the right to buy it because they technically own it, and that is based in the colonial model.
Yeah.
And you know that
My face has a disgusted look on it as you're speaking.
yeah, I think it was De Valera when the Free State was established. That was his doing.
Yeah, because Dev was, we won't talk about that.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure. I can't really elaborate a whole pile more than that. But
Okay.
it's the ownership of something. It's a great question. When it comes to land, a farmer should, and many have this ethos that they are custodians of the land.
Yeah.
You know, they are. If you have kids, you don't want to hand them a place rougher or worse than you got. You want to be more productive, more, and like a metric. Like metrics change. Like go back.
Is it more productive, or is it more sustainable? Maybe is the new,
or
like 30
Or regenerative, like
Or more
not even
beautiful.
just
Yeah, whatever,
scaling.
like biodiversity, especially like where we are just the wrong side of the hill to be in the Bride Valley. So the Bride project operates the other side of this hill. Technically, like we're in the catchment area of it, and you should see the work that some of those farmers are doing, and it's actually very low impact on their production ability. It's simple things like letting hedgerows grow, but that it's a change of
culture and
and focus.
Mindset,
and
yeah.
I think there's a word for it, locus or something. So like, to be considered a good farmer before, your hedges had to be absolutely manicured.
Yeah.
I mean, clung to the ditch. Whereas now, it's so much more respectable to have hedges growing way up, providing shelter, providing pollinators, all this kind of stuff. So things are moving, and I think just not to be unfair to you, in fairness, you spoke very well, but we haven't done, like you said, things haven't worked up to now.
I don't forget.
Go on.
Sorry, I couldn't help it. Sorry.
But there's sorry, I got lost. But no, what I was saying was, things haven't worked up to now, but we're changing, and
Yeah.
like, look, we're all young people. We're all hanging around, just hanging around 30 or shy of it, like
And bothering to talk about
Yes.
it.
and we
In a cool camper van with an awesome dog called Shadow.
but we care, like, and I don't think we're unusual for our generation. You know, so I think
The goals have changed. You talk about it not working. The goals were just different. The goals were different. What we built was a system.
yardsticks change.
We built a system that worked really well for what we wanted out of it, and unfortunately for us now, who are trying to reverse some of the effects of that.
We have legacy issues.
The goals that they had that were there it didn't include things like biodiversity or any of these other things that we're talking about. So it's not that it didn't work. It worked for what it was designed for, and it worked exceptionally well for what it was designed for. But that design was not
production.
exactly. It was designed.
And
it was
production.
it was narrow and particularly focused. And like when I spoke earlier about breeding for milk on its own and not talking about fertility, if it was
that's a great example.
It's production. It was production centric, and now we're deciding. Actually, no. There's other things that are important to us other than just pure output.
Yeah.
And it's just about I just think it's as simple as if you reward people If you reward in terms of attitude, in terms of, you know, whether it's cultural rewards, as in like lauding, like you said, not like, God, look at the man, he can't farm, his hedges are growing all over the place. As regards, we're lauding this fella. Look at this, hold this guy up, his farm, but also there's no getting away from it economically. You know, I suppose I kind of started a couple of times, and it just, what we're trying to do with ICBF, with the carbon, with the greenhouse gases, is change the conversation around. So everybody's talking about culling the national cattle population, and I spoke about how like that would affect farmers' incomes. So what we're trying to say is, look, there's another way to do this, where you don't impact on the farmers' incomes within the current system, but you're still going to end up with a reduced carbon footprint, and that's by breeding. So one of the reasons I would argue is, okay, you could go back to a system where cattle can breed with whatever they like, but you can't. It would be then impossible to say, you know, you're going to have all the inefficient cows mixing and reducing that gain. So you know, you kind of have to decide, okay, we have what we have, and we can continue to improve those so that you're minimising the impact. If we make the decision we're going to keep 500,000 cows in the country, 1 million cows, 2 million cows, whatever it is, whatever the final decision is, this is a sustainable portion of animal agriculture that we want, that incorporates all our other goals around.
As we work to change the system that underpins it, so that farmers can get more money for their food, people can value their food more, and that all takes a lot longer. Whereas this stuff that you're doing is kind of like a quick solution.
Well, it works. Breeding is it's slower than a lot of things, but what kind of reconciles me to it, like, because I would think about things on a bigger scale often myself, is if you have an intensive country that's output based, we're still helping the environment by breeding more efficient and healthier animals. Or if you go to a low intensity, like the complete opposite end of the spectrum, and you've like 500,000 cows, and it's really, you know, extensive and rewilded, we're still helping minimise the impact of those 500,000 cows by making sure that they're the best 500,000 cows they could possibly have. Do you know, that's the way I look at it. So we're going to help in the current system, but it's something that can be just immediately transferred if we change the system. Do you know?
I agree with that, but I disagree. You said a sustainable number of cattle, or whatever we get to, we say a sustainable number of cattle, because the amount of cattle we have is dictated by the amount of land we have. Again, if we're talking about our current model with the production.
Our current model,
thus that incentivises the removal of hedgerows, the removal of upland areas, the removal of everything, because the more acreage you have, the more square feet of land you have, the more cows you can get. So
that comes back to my point then about rewarding something other than production.
Okay.
So that's what I'm saying. If you want, at the minute, the only reward financially in terms of income is for extra produce.
And now, there's
not exactly.
Results-based agriculture is coming in a little bit more, where people are getting more money for having, say,
a hedgerow or
whatever.
So that's how you change. Instead of having it being like output and area based, like, you know, now, because if you bring in other metrics, like have some sort of a metric,
hedgerows,
some biodiversity constant or coefficient.
Field margin there, guys. But that's the definition of field margin: a space between the ditch and the field that wildlife can roam through.
So and flowers.
So if everyone could see that there was a hedge that has just, I would say a hedge, but you would say a field margin that has gorse and kind of like
and the wire's been
stepped out about 2 feet out.
Flowers and
Herb Robert, I think it is it?
They can all grow.
Yes.
Whereas before, the wire would have been in against the ditch, cows would have eaten all that.
Gotcha.
They're simple things, like the wildlife corridors on the farm.
They are, but can I ask then, because we were...
Can I have one point to your last point? You know, you said that land will dictate the national herd.
Yeah.
If you take pastures that are reseeded, the national average pasture will grow in around 8 tons of dry matter per year. That's utilisable. Anyone who's using modern farming techniques, and it's not that fertiliser, it's not fertiliser driving this, it's genetic gain, it's management, it's clover, things like that. They can grow in excess of 12 to 14 tons of dry matter. That's over a 50 to 60% increase in the dry matter production. That as a country that about 90%, over 90% of our cows' diet is herbage based, is essentially grass,
Yeah.
grazed grass mostly. Like that is the metric. That at some point we can't keep achieving that genetic gain unless we put a roof over the country. Like so like that land is one barrier, but I think the involvement of genetics in grassland will continue to let the national herd grow without claiming any more land.
But that puts the
What were you
pressure on
going to
the
say,
soil.
Caroline?
What's the impact on soil?
That's what I was just saying.
Yeah.
So you can increase your dry matter per hectare, and that will absorb a certain amount of your nitrogen, input, but it won't absorb everything, and you're going to have more cows then to eat that grass and more nitrogen runoff. So again, it's about, I think, like you said, it's about having some sort of a coefficient or some sort of metrics that are, if you value the environment. If biodiversity is one of your metrics, where you're in grass production, and especially if it means a sacrifice in that, the production, but then you have to reward it through some other metric. There's some other metric that you're incentivizing instead, whether it's a coefficient of biodiversity or hectares in native hedgerows or whatever it is.
Your RBP payment or whatever RBP, the P is payment.
The basic payment.
No, the results-based payment.
Results-based
yeah.
payment.
So like,
And it's funny because we're sitting here with a pearl mussel here, and that's the project on the table. We'll have to post pictures of this.
It is a pearl mussel shell that was of an individual that's 70 years old.
Wow.
Yep. Again, they can live up to about 120 years. They're quite cool.
And this mussel species is found in freshwater systems. Is it in the Bride Valley? I don't think it is.
No, it's not in the Bride. Is it in the Bride?
I don't
think so. As far as I know, it is in the
EIP,
Allu, in the EIP, so that's up around the IRD Duhallow.
It's in the Toom River, like the Gera in Macroom.
Yes.
That's I know.
And now to tell you about these freshwater pearl mussels, they can only survive in areas of high water quality, so like pristine waters. There was a time when these used to be harvested all through Ireland for the pearl, because about 1 in 1,000 had a pearl. But now I'd say there's less than 1,000 in some rivers. Like in Ireland, we've lost them entirely. What I always find incredibly sad is that freshwater pearl mussels can only live in rivers that have pristine water quality. Why isn't that all our rivers? Why have we accepted the fact that some rivers can be at poor, some rivers can be at normal? So then,
this is your field. It's not mine, to be fair. But is generally the health of rivers improving, or is it stagnated?
No.
It's the same.
It's decreasing.
Really?
It's decreasing heavily. Water quality in Ireland is decreasing at an awful rate. So again, in the 80s, we had about 30% of our rivers would be high quality.
Okay.
Now it is to about 10%, 2%. If you're looking then at the...
Diarmuid has a wincing look on his face. I wish he had video.
If we're looking at our pristine blue dots, so the best water quality that is in the country, that has dropped from 35% to 17%. So just of those catchments.
In how many years?
So that again is from the 80s.
So they're talking 50 years.
So now 50. But so it's weird when you think about it. 2000 always seems to be like everything's awful, but no. So that's the thing. Again, my numbers are a bit off. I wish I had my book that had it. Generally, there is a decrease.
Is responsibility to be laid to feed the farmers?
Honestly, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
In the majority of cases,
it's disappointing to hear.
So
it's my point of view.
Yeah, it is. So it depends on the river catchment you're looking at.
Yeah.
So for the majority of rivers in Ireland, the majority of the pressures is farming, and it is agricultural runoff, either nitrogen or phosphorus, depending on the part of the country you are. Again, and then nitrogen is coming from the fertilizer. Yeah. So again, the ways you can stop that, having kind of barriers along the edges of rivers. Don't have your cattle going into the rivers. That prevents it as well. Some places
effective use of nitrogen.
Effective use. That's it. It's the injection now.
But also there's sometimes policy can be detrimental too, because if you take something a bit like the nitrates, where it's calendar based.
Calendar farming.
It's definitely, I think, led to I think a lot of farmers want to get as much as they can out of their slurry, because price of nitrogen fertilizers gone up so much. But a lot of the time they're forced to go out in the worst conditions in terms of runoff, because they've been forced to not spread it for the last 2 weeks were perfect, and they couldn't spread it because by law and the calendar they weren't, on average they're not the times they should be spreading it. I know they had to try and do something, but at the same time,
climate change is going to lead into that more.
Our climate is changing.
It's completely flipped. Our standard calendar is gone.
But it doesn't. When does it ever rain on this? How can you?
It's the end of May. It's freezing. It's
just something that gets me. I've seen guys who break it. I mean, there's tons of guys who break it, but you're looking at them, it's perfect conditions. In perfect conditions in terms of temperature, in terms of moisture levels.
And you're risking your payment because you're going out.
And then I've seen other fellas absolutely horsing it out because they've tanks overflowing. And they've no choice but to get it out because they have been bound to keep
capacity,
it for...
It can be a very wet winter. The tanks can be full of rainwater as much as effluent slurry.
Something that came up... Sorry, go ahead.
So just to continue about the water quality then.
Yes.
Because again, all of the problems can't be put at the feet of farmers. In most catchments, the majority can in the upland area, in majority areas. Again, that runoff can be stopped. Again, if you put in barriers, you can put in kind of areas that will stop the runoff from running into the waters. Kind of put trees along the edges of the rivers that can stop that. Having cutbacks, laybacks like you have there away from the rivers, that will work as well. Again, if you go to the pristine rivers up in the upland areas, it's forestry is the biggest pressure there. So again, it's the planting of conifers in our upland areas. They acidify the rivers and then make it so that they can't move. So again, you can't say precisely. After that, then we can go down to humans. So again, we can talk about the runoff from septic tanks, the runoff from
sewage treatment plants working properly and that type of thing.
Exactly. So it's a multifaceted problem.
Yes.
Yet again, farming is a big issue, but it's also, I believe anyway, the area that we can make the biggest change quickest and easiest.
There's something in this, I think it came up last week as well, about just the mental stress of all of this, just this conversation in itself. Someone said last week that it's all the farmers need therapy to have to go and shift from this system that was, like you were saying, was working perfectly for what it was meant to do, and now suddenly looking at the whole realm of science, it's we have to really shift it.
Everything you've been doing for your whole life is wrong. You've been wrong. And
where is the emotional support? Where is that support for mental health and well-being? Where is the kind of the building of sturdier communities to actually be able to talk about those things, especially when you've got macho culture and you can't really talk about your feelings? This is really intense stuff, and not just for farmers but also for ecologists. I mean, I've worked a lot with eco-grief. This stuff takes a really taxing toll on our emotional health, and it's also something none of us are taught in school. It doesn't matter what level of society you're in, it's not taught. So that seems to be a massive failing as well when it comes to policy and all of this, to have the stress of, will I spread story this week, even though I might
all our
lose
parents
my
were 30
payments.
years of age. They probably sat around a table saying, we're progressive, we'll change the future, but just things take time, and I know we keep saying it, but goalposts change. Sorry, you were in the middle of a point.
No, I wanted to add to Mel's there, because a lot of time it wasn't even that what you were doing was wrong, what farmers were told. It was you are wrong. And that's what I think is the biggest problem.
Yeah, it's personalised, isn't it?
Yes.
That's why you think so many people really get their backs up. There's a...
It's us versus them thing.
Yeah, but it's...
we have a dog running around mad at the moment.
But it is. It's quite personal, and it's a bit like a lot of these things. It's kind of how do you change attitudes without it being seen as what you were doing before. You are not a failure, or even what you were doing before wasn't a failure. you know, it's you.
Yeah.
But we know more now. You know, we get this all the time. Why did my indexes change in my animals? Why is this animal now the lowest ranked animal in my herd, and why was it the best before? Because we know more now than we did before, and we were obliged now to reevaluate the whole thing based on that. Like, you know?
My thought is, if everyone's trained as a scientist, that is how you think. Because that is a scientific thought of people give out to science for changing. Like, that's the point. Science, if like people are saying science like it's changing and all that, and Diarmuid had a brilliant thing about it. He goes, I know science doesn't know everything, because if it did, it would stop.
Yes.
Like, and science changes, but science is very purely rational. And the thing is, when you're giving science to a group of humans who are rational but also very irrational, you need to have a system as well that helps to deal with that emotional irrational part, or else you're failing. And I think that's where this kind of stuff comes in, like conversation, bit of crack agus kill, like sitting around the table with good nutritious food to talk about these things that are kind of challenging, you know, or having good communication skills to navigate this. Because I mean, geez, I listened to 1 or 2 interviews there with the Farmers Journal, because I genuinely wanted to hear what was being said. Oh my god, it was so exhausting listening to just even the style of communication, you know. It was just so argumentative when it didn't really need to be. I was like,
that's the culture.
you know,
I think there's something about feeling like you're being listened to.
yeah,
You know, even if
people
somebody
want
is
to be
really
listened to.
disagreeing with you, like if you feel like you've been listened
And
to,
respected for your point of view.
Yeah.
But there just seems to be polarisation. And look, probably
Right and
the
wrong.
media are really responsible for a lot of it. Because people fighting sells so much better than people getting along.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah, like, let's put this way, like soaps. Everyone watches a soap. Imagine there was a soap that was about a street where everyone liked each other.
It was happy.
And we're happy and just went to each other's house.
cancelled.
Exactly. That's not for 2 episodes. You know?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
It's a fact. And like, look, I suppose it's the world we're living in now too. Everything is hyperized. We've complete information saturation.
Yeah, I just want to slow down. Just stop talking to me. Let's just be quiet.
You go.
It's actually harder. It's harder now because we have less trust in where the information is coming from.
Yeah.
And people are actively also, I believe, more intentionally disseminating information that's not correct.
Yes.
You have more information than ever, but actually you're less well informed because it's so much harder to decipher.
What's right and what's
Well,
wrong?
yeah,
What's right?
I would feel that.
Chaff, like you don't.
Yeah, one time
no,
if you read something from certain publications, you could be fairly confident that it was reliable and accurate and fairly unbiased, like, you know. And maybe I was naive in that belief, but you know, whereas now you just
There's so much.
yeah.
But I wouldn't call myself an academic, right? But look, I have unfortunately had to read a lot of scientific papers.
You've done a PhD.
Yeah, so
You're as close to an academic as we can.
A recovering academic.
A high functioning academic.
Excellent. You have to look at research so critically now. Where did it come from? Who
paid
funded
for
it?
it?
Who funded it? And you can go on Elsevier, you can go on Science, you can go website, anywhere you want to go, and you'll find this argument, and you'll find this argument contradicts it.
Of course, only if you can get past the paywall to get to it.
Exactly. Elsevier, lads, you need to Google what a con job there. It is phenomenal. How can you get a system that has your writers doing it for nothing, your reviewers doing it for nothing, and then the company, so the college that funded the research have to pay then to view it.
Yeah.
He had his head screwed on that.
Oh yeah. To anyone who's interested, best website, Sci-Hub.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is
Open source jobs, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of like ResearchGate. Or no, it's more public focused.
it is actually, you need to actually get the proper name of that. Sorry, I think it's Sci-Hub.
It is Sci-Hub, yeah.
Yeah, it's basically it was a pirate scientific website.
It's like Napster.
Set up by this woman in Russia, and it keeps getting shut down. So
The
it keeps
most
coming up
boring
with
pirate
different
operation
names.
ever.
But do you know the thing is, it's tried to be shut down like 5 or 6 times. But scientists actually will publish their own research and send it to Sci-Hub because that's how they can access it. Because they can't access their own research because it's behind a paywall. You imagine that. Think about that. Imagine working for 4 years You publish your signed paper, and then you have to pay to look at your own stuff.
Who owns what?
I know.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
That's big business, guys.
Yeah.
And like that's back when Russians and cyber used to be our friends.
Let's not get into the realm of
I know.
We were doing so well for so long.
Okay.
Just for context, this is the week that the HSE got hacked.
If you're listening in the future.
Okay, so to just wrap it up, I think if we went around the room, do people in general feel like they're hopeful for the future, or like there's no hope? I feel hopeful.
Hugely hopeful, because what's the point otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, totally hopeful. Yeah.
What's the point?
Yeah. Thank God. Yeah.
God, don't make me make that decision. Yeah, 'cause that's much more existential question. Than no, I would. I am. It gets me down sometimes when you hear people like, oh, you get all these conspiracy theories and this cynicism, and a certain amount of it is absolutely justified. But then I go, like, I'm working inside, like, we get a lot of criticism. We're towing a political tightrope inside an ICBF, and we get a lot of criticism from different actors in the industry. And they go, oh, they're only looking out for the big fella.
Yeah.
They're looking out for themselves, they're looking out for this and that. And I'm sitting there thinking, if you only knew the fights we have inside, just among our team, about how passionate, like, one person on the Hard Plus team gets to another about what's right for the farmer, and then, like, if you only knew, and then you're saying that we're doing it for the big fella, like, you just kind of go,
come on.
It gets to me sometimes. It does, like, so when I see the people in the organisation,
there's some super people in that
organisation. And I've met them all across the industry, and they have different perspectives, they have different opinions about what's the right thing to do. They're coming from different backgrounds, but they genuinely they have the best interest of agriculture in general, and farmers and rural communities at heart. They're not doing it. They put hours and hours and hours of their time and years of their life and absolute passion. They don't end up millionaires, and they don't end up or anything like this. So I believe people is what gives me hope.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And just seeing your passion as well proves exactly what you're saying about where you work.
ICBF, look, as an outside view into them, like, you can only respect them. Like, as any critical person will, you'll always, that could be done better. That could be done better.
Oh, everything. There's lots of things we do that we could do better.
That's the same in every industry.
It is, but it's not just that should never be seen as criticism. It just should seen as development. And like, I have an opinion. Certain traits I'd rank them personally higher over other traits. But like, that's my narrative. Like, and ICBF have to walk. They have to walk through a very crowded area and come out the other side with the best idea they can. And like, they do with great consultation with their farmers and stakeholders. And like, I can't stress that they're so well respected around the world. They're one of the largest computational computing systems in the country. ICBF down Bandon, they have, like, they're
in what used to be a cattle shed.
Yeah, they are.
I'm not being flippant, but our office used to be an AI station.
Are you familiar with Oracle? It's like a database system.
Yes,
they're a case study a worldwide case study for Oracle. They are, like, it is super, and the redundancies in terms of technology down there.
He's done a better job for ICBF than I did.
I hope you get a promotion.
Thanks, David. Thanks.
You're going to get a letter in the door going, you know what happened?
He's going to come to me now afterwards. Something to do with Lincoln and Grasshopper upwards.
Okay, thank you all so much for the chat. I think we could go on for
very interesting.
Really, really fun. So
thank you very much, everyone. You were fantastic, and it's been fascinating.
It's a pleasure meeting you guys. I've met you then before, and I'm always inspired by your passion for everything, literally everything. And it's lovely to meet you too, man, in fairness, and you, Mark, of course.
I'm sure our paths will cross.
There's no fear.
Caroline and definitely.
Fantastic. Good luck, everyone.
Peace.
Have a great day.